Let's continue our discussion on team and team process, and let's start to look at the various different roles of individuals on a team. Now here's a list of, by category, if you will, various different team roles. Some of them may be within the team itself proper. Some of them sometimes are people outside of the team. Sponsor, champion are commonly individuals that are not kind of within the team themselves. They're um, they're individuals. My experience has been that they're usually at more senior management levels than the team leader or the various other people on the team themselves. So let's start with the champion, right? So the champion is dedicated to seeing whatever is the cause of that team succeed. Um, they're they're a wonderful resource. They're a great way to get feedback from outside of the team setting itself, kind of on things that are going on and things that are helpful. I know in my personal experience, although my direct boss and then usually theirs were also played a sponsor or a champion kind of role for me. Some of the most meaningful champions I had were not in the same org structure as myself and my team were. In fact, they were in other parts of the organization. They just felt strongly that the things that we were working on were important for the organization overall. And so they were quite committed to seeing us succeed, and was very, very helpful in kind of navigating and introductions to certain people in certain places, and a variety of important um, functions for the team. They tended to take ownership. They absolutely had authority for the changes, and that was one of the things that was quite helpful, and really, really helped me as a team leader move the ball forward and help made us much more successful. Now, a team leader, which was a common one that I had, it's like in many cases it's like a manager from the standpoint of that it's about the team, it's not about you individually, and the results are not from you as an individual contributor necessarily, but they're from the collective of the team themselves. There are some team leader situations where you're still an individual contributor, but very often it's a situation where it is like a manager or management. So your expertise needs to be very similar, right? So the planning, organizing, staffing, controlling, directing, which are all basic management functions. Um, Obviously, the role needs to have experience in doing that. You're usually the spokesperson for the team. So between yourself and the rest of the organization and other parties, you're the one that's the spokesperson. You're also usually involved in a lot of logistical things, so for meeting setups and stuff like that. Um, Within the team, you're collectively responsible for the output of everyone, but individually, you're responsible to each of various different team members in supporting their activities and their development and their growth. Again, very much like a manager. And you need to be able to, as much as possible, resolve any dysfunction in the team. And usually, the best way to deal with it is to avoid them in the first place. And we talked about some things that you can do prior, right? But lots of focus on the maintenance, lots of focus on good, consistent communications, developing good relationships between the various individuals. Like a lot of this stuff can prevent the dysfunction from seeping in. I'm responsible as a team leader, right, for making sure that the work gets done. It's done on time. Deal with logistics. I'm a coach. It really is a management role. It's just management specifically for that team itself. Now, occasionally, you may need the use of a facilitator. So you wouldn't normally have a facilitator as part of your team ongoing. Basically, they're trained in facilitation skills. Facilitation is basically to make easy. And they deal with the process and how people act and interact with each other, as opposed to the subject matter area, which is why you'll find facilitators can move from one space to another, because what they understand is the culture and the people. They don't necessarily have to understand the specifics of a particular industry, right? So they could do it in government, they could do it in industry, they could do it in education, they could do it like in a variety of different spaces, because it's how people are interacting with each other, or potentially the challenges in the interaction with people that they're focused on. They're also a skill set that you see that often get used to facilitate larger meetings. And in fact, the video in the weekly material, that's one of the things that gentleman does, is he facilitates great big meetings. But they're the exact same, it's the exact same skill set that's used. And really it's about focusing on the people and the interactions between them. And in the context of a team structure, usually they're brought in when you're having trouble having the team leader actually resolve issues within the team. Sometimes because it involves you directly, so sometimes you're too close to it to be able to resolve it. Other times you might use a facilitator proactively, right? So a longer term project, as you're transitioning from one phase to another and some members are leaving and new ones are coming in, you may use a facilitator to organize kind of an event to mark that transition. And what you're going to try to do under that context is you're going to try to not lose momentum, right? Because otherwise, when you change it, the team members, in a lot of cases, you end up going back to the forming piece again, and then you got to work your way through all the cycles to actually get productivity moving again. Depending on how the facilitator creates that event, you may be able to kind of short circuit the length of time it takes you to get back up and moving productively. So they're responsible for ensuring that the stage that the team is in is appropriate, and the things that they're doing is appropriate for their stage. They'll intervene as appropriate to make sure that, you know, everybody's interacting and everybody's being respectful to each other, and you know, those that are a little more quiet or reserved, are their voices still being heard. And they'll give feedback and ask for feedback, and they will do that equally with all of the various different team members. But it's usually a special purpose role, right? So you would bring it in at a transition time, for example, to help you, or you would bring it in if you were having some issues between team members or between the leader and the team members. The team leader themselves was ineffective in being able to resolve. This would be kind of your hired gun that you would bring in to help resolve the often personality issues that were taking place. So you might consider using this kind of a role. The team has lost traction, right? So sometimes you'll get to this point where, you know, they won't be making the progress they were making prior. And one of the things the facilitator will help do is kind of peel back to figure out, you know, where did things go off the rails, and then what kind of things do you need to do to get things back on track. There's a list of common team problems, as I said before, how you set the tone, how you set the culture of the team, and then certainly as a team leader, how you walk the walk goes a long way to potentially preventing some of these issues from happening. And is usually the best way to deal with them is proactively, you know, prevent them from the first place. When they come up, it's often a sign of mismanagement, honestly, from a leadership standpoint when they come up. Now, sometimes things happen from the outside that, you know, you have no control over. You know, the team loses a member because, you know, the person gets fired or is really sick and they're, you know, they can't work anymore. There's something significantly disruptive that happens. I mean, you can't really, it is what it is. You kind of just got to be able to take it from there. Some of the other things like feuding and dominating and things like that, those are issues that if you deal with them right away and keep them in check, that they don't get worse. And often it's kind of through, I think often it's through wishful thinking, right? That they kind of hope that it'll get better, and it doesn't get better. It only continues to usually get worse. Some ways that you would facilitate, and these are things that a facilitator or a good team leader would do as well, right? Which is make sure everybody's heard. even those that are reluctant, because the dominating ones will always share their opinion. And that's great that they are. One of the things you want to do is have them stretch and listen more, and you want to have the quiet people stretch and participate more. What you want to try to do is kind of equalize to some degree. You want to resolve any conflict between team members, and not in front of everyone else. This is something that you would do kind of as a sidebar between each of them, and then collectively with the two of them. You provide feedback, right, to various different team members. I mean, one of the common things that team leaders will be doing is very regularly being in touch with the individual team members, and not just asking things about the work that they're doing on, but things like, so how's it going, and how do you feel about this, and what's going on with this, and really deal with people as people. You're not there to try to solve their problems outside of work, but you do need to accept people as they are and as they come, and as the people that they are. And I think you'll find that people respond positively to that, and you tend to get a little more glue between the team members and the leadership, and the team members and each other. Big piece of managing the team process is being able to evaluate progress. And this can be a real challenge, because often there's a schedule or a set of expectations about what's going to happen when. And very, very often the reality doesn't match the scheduling. So there's issues with expectations, there's issues with figuring out, are we not on schedule because of something we're not doing right? Are we not on schedule because the schedule was unrealistic to begin with? Are we not, right? Which is kind of a situation that needs to be resolved, and you need to be able to figure it out. But there is an ongoing struggle between progress versus schedule. And this is a space that you'll find that project management skills are really, really helpful, because often one of the challenges is in the discrepancy between expectation and reality, or progress versus schedule, often comes down to the fact that the activities that are going on aren't usually solely within the team themselves. There's other people that have to do things at different points in time, and being able to keep everybody on a similar schedule and kind of with a similar level of focus is a bit of a challenge. Your measurements for success, right, needs to be as objective as possible, right? So not just how do we feel about the work that we're doing, or how do we feel that things are going. Those are important impressions for the individuals, but from a team overall, objectively, what is it you're trying to accomplish? What does success look like? What are the various different signposts along the path that would indicate the kind of progress that you're making? Teams themselves usually have kind of check-in points where each member will kind of evaluate how they think the team is doing, right? As well as themselves, and that information is good to share to make sure that you get a consistent view within the organization. Often what the team's working on has a customer, whether an internal or an external customer on it. So feedback from that customer is certainly a very effective piece of the evaluation schedule. And then one of the things that you'll find is teams often work on something where it's cyclical, and they're going to go through this cycle over and over and over again. Think about a team that does events, for example, and they do an event, and then they're going to do it for the next year and the next year and the next year. Well, you debrief after the sessions, and you kind of share the lessons learned, right? So what happened? What do we feel good about? What do we feel not so good about? What kinds of things would we do differently in the next planning cycle to try to avoid potentially some of the challenges that we saw, or to make some alterations so that the results that we get are even better than we had in the previous situation. Big piece of keeping people glued to what they're doing is rewards and recognition. And I don't mean rewards necessarily from a tangible or financial standpoint. You can use financial rewards. The truth is, well, if you remember back from the Dan Pink video that talked about the puzzle motivation, monetary, or, if you do this, then you get that, like those contingent rewards, they don't tend to work terribly well unless what somebody is doing is simple and mechanistic. And most team function isn't that way. There's usually some, cognitive elements to it. In which case those if then, carrot stick conditional motivators, which often are financial rewards, uh, actually don't work very well. The things that work best are usually things that are on the recognition path, because they recognize that most individuals in the workplace are going to be motivated somewhere in the self-esteem and self-actualization space. And both of those, there are far more effective ways to speak to those, right? So public recognition, visible support, positive feedback, um, you know, there can be some material rewards. Often, if you do them as non-monetary, they have better longevity. Very very common incentive structure that works well is a point system. So for a variety of various different things, you accumulate points, and then those points the individual can trade in towards various different merchandise or travel things. And the idea is that they end up doing or getting something that they wouldn't normally get, and then that experience or that thing that they got lives on beyond the time period or the individual things that they got it for. And people will remember years and years later, oh, we went on that trip to Tahiti, and that was as a result of, the fact that we were able to accomplish this wonderful thing, and that was kind of the reward for doing it. Those things tend to actually have a lot more meaning. You can do a gain sharing, which is basically like if the team's responsibility, for example, is to save money to the organization, they may set it up that of the money that the team can save, that a certain percentage of that would be distributed back to the team on an annual basis. So the idea is to try to encourage they get skin in the game. The more money they save, the more they potentially get for themselves. And bonuses can be a similar kind of structure. Like I said, you have to be careful, because as much as people will say they want money because it gives them the ultimate options, and it's the most liquid of um, all reward structures that you can put in place. Psychologically, it tends to focus the mind too much, and then it kind of dampens creativity, which, as I said, often in a team setting is actually not what you want. You actually want the creativity part of it. So you got to be careful. It is very situationally dependent. It has a lot to do with the personalities and the individuals, and so there's certainly a variety of tools that are available to be used. The fact is that it is important to be able to continue to support and recognize the activities that are going on in each of the teams.